Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion about media and virtual production. Second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. We had a cancellation today, so we're changing to audio pathology, which is going to be a great second hour. Talking about, how do we figure out what's missing? How do we figure out what's wrong? We're going to take a look at that pretty deeply. But let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Mitch, what do we have?
Thank you, Alex. Our first one's in from Isaac Lay in Dayton, Ohio. Micro Center is offering Creality Ender version 2 3D printers for $100 for new customers. What are your most useful prints for production or otherwise?
Go ahead, Courtney.
That's Creality Ender 3 V2. They have more versions of the Creality Ender 3 than anything. There's like 5 different versions of the Ender 3. Ender 3 V1, they still sell the 1, the V2, the Eno, the Plus, the Pro. Anyway, here's something, a Vesa plate that I designed and printed with my Ender 3 V2. And I've been working on a shock mount for my Sennheiser microphones. This is all 3D printed. And I use this squishy neoprene foam in there to dampen the springiness of the elastic so that it doesn't resonate at a resonant frequency. And it works quite well and is stiff enough to keep the microphone from hitting the inside of basket windscreens. So there's a couple of things that I've designed just right off the bat. And they're only $100. How could you go wrong, huh?
I think one of the funner things that I did with the printer is I decided I wanted to build a 4ME switcher out of ATEM minis. So I built a rack that would set all of the ATEM minis on top of each other. I don't have it here at the moment, but so that you could feed all the other ATEM minis back into the main ATEM mini. So it was I wanted to do that with the Extreme, but I just haven't had 8 Extremes in one place to do the test. So maybe someday in the future. Next question.
I also found my COVID mask.
Yeah, there we go. The printed COVID mask.
That was printed out of a TPU. It's urethane, so it's flexible and
Darth
forms
edition.
to the face.
One of the things that I thought was really interesting, there was a 3D company that I think went under. I think it didn't turn out well for them, but they you could scan your face and it would actually give you a mask that fit your face. And the really problem was it was really designed to work just with surgical masks, and it's kind of a weird, I was like, if they just made this a little easier to work with, but you got this great mold of your face to do it exactly the way you needed it. The hard part was really that you had to figure out the right surface. The TPU, I think, was a little bit better because it would stretch a little bit, with your mouth. Next question.
And it's coming from Brody Brazil in San Francisco. Brody asked for Bill, since we're both Apollo users, I'd like to be curious to know and see your signal chain with the 416.
Good, Bill.
So it starts with a Sennheiser MKH 416 microphone, which is on a boom arm and sits right here below there and points directly at my mouth. That is fed by an XLR cable into one of these, a little Rolls mic mute, and I use that during the show constantly to mute myself so that I can be absolutely sure that I don't fiddle, because in the first days I was trying to use the mute on Zoom and it just didn't seem to work. And as I've mentioned many times on the show before, I love the positive. I can put my finger on this switch even when I'm not looking at it and tell whether the mic is active or not. And that seems to work really well for me. It's quiet and solid. That then goes into the Apollo Solo, and I think Dennis might have a picture of it up here. I picked the Solo. Apollo makes a huge line of things, and there's a duet and a bunch of other things. The Solo I particularly liked because it seemed to be the simplest interface, but that almost snapped me in this respect. I thought it was going to be simple. It turns out that Apollo devices are not simple. They have a simple interface sometimes on top, and the Solo does. It's just one big button and a series of smaller buttons that put it into different modes. Behind it, though, it uses software called Console, and I don't know if Dennis has the Console. Oh, there's the Sennheiser 416. That is the mic that I use. It is a mic used often in voiceover because it really cuts through a busy background track really well. It is not as warm or fulsome as things like Neumann's and other large diaphragm condensers, but boy, this does a really good job, has some low end in it, and it really cuts through things. The other piece of this process is the console software from Universal Audio. And that's what fooled me at first. And if it wasn't for our friend Mickey, who's sitting in the panel here, I would have been pretty lost, because I dug down into this console application and I realized how much depth there was back there. This simple thing that I thought was going to be maybe 1 or 2 channels. I mean, I thought literally solo, maybe it's just one mic input, and that's fine. That's all I use it for. There's a secondary input that I use to feed the mic from the voice booth that's in the other room. But you dig down there and you actually have multiple channels and a lot of patching and switching that happens in software. And so it took Mickey's help, thank you, Mickey, so much, to get me on the right path to get a signal. We did try. Universal Audio Apollo is known for all sorts of digital signal processing. And so they have microphone emulators and amplifier emulators and compressor emulators. It is a gigantic ecosystem of audio add-ons. But after all was said and done, and using Mickey's ears and trying to train my ears, we ended up using the Solo just cold without any processing at all. So what you're hearing right now is a 416 into the Apollo Solo, into a laptop, and off into the web that way. And this is what that chain sounds like. Hope that didn't go too far.
That's great. Next question.
And next one comes in from me. Interesting question. What is your preferred microphone for DJs that like to do the mic drop?
Carl.
So if a DJ is coming to an event and the DJ's not bringing their own mic and they want to drop your mic, then I'll just bring a Behringer. Yeah. So the 8500 is $25. I think they're $19 generally. This is like full price. That way you can actually probably put it on their bill every time they drop it. But this thing will last about 1,000 drops quite easily.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I'd probably go with a cabled SM58. Of course, don't go with a 58 capsule on a wireless transmitter. It would most likely survive a drop. You might ding the metal grill, but it's only $8 to $10 to replace that grill. Or if you buy the grills in bulk, you can find it for like $5 or $6 US per grill. And what do you call this? If it does break, of course, as Carl mentioned, you would L&D it to whoever destroyed it. But the overall replacement price is extreme. You know, the SM58 is a very affordable mic.
Go ahead, Bill.
And this is such a dangerous maneuver that I highly suggest you get a training mic for this. This is a training mic that no matter how you drop it, no matter what you throw it at, it will not be damaged. So prepare yourself to do this radical maneuver.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I can't top that one. I yield my position.
Yeah, the other thing, if they're going to swing it, you know, if they're not going to just drop it, if they're going to swing it, just make sure to tape the mic to the cable to make sure that otherwise the connector there will fail, and then they'll throw it out into the crowd, and then there'll be more than mic damage. Next question.
And it's from Brody Brazil in San Francisco. For those in the Sony ecosystem of cameras, what is the best method and preferred settings to get colors and skin tones to pop when framing up a headshot?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I'm a Sony fanboy, and I use Sony's. The best way to get that is if you're in the Cine Alta line of Sony cameras, and that's everything from this one, the FX3, all the way up to the Venice, is to use a thing called S-Cinetone, which is a picture profile that Sony has. It's just a modified version of the Rec 709. It's an S709. I guess that means it's Sony's. But it modifies a low height, light contrast. The Cinetone will also have softer and lighter highlights. I'm reading from their literature. But higher contrast levels and low luminance levels will give you a more saturated look and therefore a more cinematic look. So I recommend it because it works well in the Sony culture.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't really think of cinematic and saturated to be this, you know, to be in the same family. Oftentimes, cinematic tends to be a little desaturated when we look at it, or a little less saturated in its colors. One thing that I'd still always say is that if you're going to do something that matters, make sure that you have scopes on set. You know, because especially if you're going to go out and you want to see what it looks like, you want to convert it, even if you're capturing log. You want to convert it to 709 and know that it's going to look relatively good, even if that's not the LUT that you finally use, although it really helps if you build all of that on set. It just helps you know what you're shooting into. You will still have latitude, especially if you're shooting in log later. I mean, if you're shooting in log with the camera, you'll have some latitude later to make it better. Or if you're doing live, you definitely want to know what you're shooting into. Go ahead, Bill, real quick.
I was just going to say, also think about hiring a colorist like our dear friend Charles Klein. Every time I've sent my work out to somebody who's seriously good at that, it comes back and I always go, wow, that is so much better than when it left me.
It turns out if you hire a professional to do professional work, you get a professional end product. Next question.
Next question from Guy Cochran. If you were writing the article, 20 Things I Learned in Office Hours, what would you include?
Go ahead, Eric.
That's a very good question. I think I would start with something that I don't think was an answer to a question in office hours, which is there's a lot of people like me out there. I think that's one of the things about office hours that's really unique is that we're not just a group of people who enjoy media and production. We're also a group of people that have a very wide-ranging and eclectic taste in things. And that's something that I don't get very often in other forums. And that's why I really like After Hours because, it becomes kind of a conversational, water cooler talk. We talk about technology. We talk about the things that matter in media production, but we also talking about things that are unique to our interests. And for me, it's probably the most fundamental
Go ahead, Carl.
value I get.
I think I've learned how to answer esoteric questions at about 3 o'clock in the morning. That's something I didn't know I could do. So daylight savings is approaching soon, which means office hours will start 2 hours later for me pretty soon.
Oh, no.
So it'll be 1:30 till 3:30 in the morning office hours. So we're coming. All the Australians are waiting for it, so it's going to happen. But yeah, so there's kind of the ability for me to actually function, not every day, but at least 1 or 2 days a week, where I can actually function up till sunrise and actually, not fall asleep on after hours at least.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I think that I would probably put in there something about learning to whisper would be my top subject.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Bill.
I'm going to riff on Nathan's because I agree with that. The thing to me I've learned is the value of curiosity, because almost everybody that I've run across on the panel, that's the thing they share in common. They know a lot about a lot of things. Why? Because they've been curious about it. They come across something they don't understand. And sometimes we see a subject and we go, I'm not interested in that at all. But if the subject is at all inherently interesting or it has any relevance to your life, you find yourself getting curious and going, I want to dig a little bit deeper and see how that works. And this is just a group of people who all seem to share that same habit, and that's fun.
Go, John.
In the office hour database that I keep, every day I write down in the record for that day something that was brought up on office hours I learned. It's an amazing list of information.
Go ahead, Courtney.
I've learned a number of technical things, and one thing is how to get up consistently at 5:50 in the morning. And I've learned that if I want to be reader, I have to get up before Mitch, and he's on the East Coast, so that's almost impossible.
I think that I've learned. I probably learned something every single day, but I think that one of the things that I learned is that you could actually build a lot of friendships and connections, online. I think that, as before it was like, you can talk to people and you can get information, and you might have some people that from forums, but something about the video and a lot of time together and after hours and everything else that kind of has, I really feel like I know folks here in a way that I've never had before for an online community. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, it's interesting because I wrote the first article, which was 10 things I learned from office hours, and that one got a lot of views. And now I wanted to follow it up, but you guys just reminded me it's really about just the community. I mean, I'm sitting here looking for little technical things like, Isadora and Universe and WLM meters and how we use loopback and things like that. But it's really interesting that now I actually want to look at 10 things or 20 things I learned from not only office hours, but after hours. Because now that I think about it, a lot of the things that we discussed were brought about there because we just tugged at it, we poked at it, and we just kept pushing until we had a breakthrough. So there's been a lot of discoveries in after hours, and I forget that it's not just on the show or in the chat during the show, which also has a lot of good information, especially when Mickey's in there and not on here, but he's in the chat, and same with A. Mitchell's and some of these guys. So hats off to you guys too for adding so much value in the back end.
To go to Alex.
Yeah, I don't know if it was Google's motto that said something like fail fast and fail hard, but I was reading the Lockheed Martin book about the Skunkworks project, and I feel like Office Hours is one giant Skunkworks project, which I find incredibly intriguing because there's so much experimentation, just seeing what works and what doesn't work, and I find that fascinating.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I am surprised at the scale at which we've been able to do stuff. When you look at the team that does this show, for instance, the scale of what it takes to build what runs the show and the people that it takes to do it. I'm always surprised that we could just kind of come together with people who just volunteered all over the world and end up with something that looks and sounds like this. It's pretty amazing. Next question.
I've got a question. We were talking on Office After Hours last night on how to match a complete package for the best voice recordings for your voice, a mic, headphones, and processor, if any. What would you use?
Go ahead, Carl.
I think for 95% of situations, I would be going into the Behringer, the B2 Pro. So this is their U87. They're on the 6th version of this. So they're getting pretty close. If you look at the curves, it matches U87 pretty closely. And the UV1. So this is their single channel voice processor. You can do it in bypass. So you can just use it as a preamp, or you can have the actual, the actual processing part in the chain as well. And it pumps out a high quality USB, has a USB interface built into it as well. But for starters, I would start here. This would cover, as I said, 95% of most people. There's 5% of people that would be beneficial on different equipment maybe.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, every mic sounds different, and some mics work better with other voices. Some mics don't. I think like for a very general, like talking specifically about voiceover, if I were in a situation where I do not know what the talent sounds like, and there's not enough time to experiment with different preamps and different mics on that talent, they just get in the booth and get out. I would default to a U87 because it sounds good on most voices, paired up with a Universal Audio LA610. It's a relatively transparent sounding preamp. It has some EQ capability and an optical compressor in it if you need that. But like for all around, generic VO, that would be my audio path.
Good, Mitchell.
It's interesting, what we were talking about is that how I hear myself back in my headsets and with the microphone also determines how I use my voice, interestingly enough. And if I don't hear it properly, then I'm not going to be able to engage, proximity effects and mic technique that work well. So I use a U87, like Mickey suggests. A processor I use is a Neve 8801, which is very musical. Rupert Neve knows how to do that stuff. And for headphones, the venerable Sony 7506s.
You got Bill?
7605, sorry.
I'm going to change day by day because why? My voice changes day by day, and most people's voice change. So if you were looking for something when you're first starting out and you don't have much in the way of technique or musculature to project your voice properly, almost any mic, you can spend $20,000 on a mic chain, but it's going to record what is 3 inches from the capsule. And so if you haven't built your voice, it is one sound. After you've been doing this for a year, your voice will be different. Your muscles will get stronger. You'll have better breath control. You will be able to articulate things better. And a different mic at that point might be a good change. So literally, I remember the first mics I used, I got a little bit better. I changed to slightly better mics. I got better after 2 or 3 years. 10 years in, I was buying Neumanns and things like that because I knew how to get the most out of them. And I don't think that would have, if I bought the Neumann first, I would have been, I think, disappointed in what I got out of it.
Alex?
Yeah, so I agree with the U87 on the sort of lower end to mid-range, and a really good choice is an Audio-Technica 4033, which I know actually quite a few voiceover schools use those to teach with. Those are really good. And the current sleeper hit that I have back here, which I'll probably switch to soon, is the SE2200, which I believe retails for about $300 US. For channel strips, I've tried a lot, and a very reasonable one is made by ART. It's called the Voice Channel. And I think Sweetwater has it for about $600 right now, and that has a vacuum tube in it. It has pretty much everything that you would possibly need in there. It's got a parametric EQ, it's got a compressor, a de-esser, a downward expander, and it even has some adjustments for high or low plate voltage on the tube. So you can really get a lot of different characters out of that channel strip. And for, $600 or so, it sounds incredible. I bought a lot of them, and they're very reliable.
Go ahead, Eric.
I was going to say what's different about voiceovers is obviously the sound treatment in the room. And I think sound treatment is actually as important, if not more important, than any microphone you're going to have. Because you might change from microphone to microphone throughout the years. You might land on a particular microphone that you really love. You love the sound of your voice. But the things that don't change are the room treatment. And if you can treat your room well, it's going to last a long time. And I would say include that in any conversation you have about any mics or audio chain.
Yeah, definitely the environment. I mean, I definitely will shift back and forth based on what kind of environment I'm in and what I think it will support. Looking for mics like a PR40 that's going to have a lot of off-axis rejection if there's a little bit of more room noise. Whereas if I have something to clean up the audio live, or if I have a room that I can tighten up, I'm going to use a larger diaphragm mic for what I'm doing. Next question.
From Simon Rea in Shrewsbury, UK. What Mac software would you recommend to simultaneously record camera and 2 or more separate audio interfaces, for example, a MixPre and Bluetooth headset, into one file? This is to have perfectly in-sync backup audio that I can remove later if not needed.
Good, Carl.
So in the Mac, if you go into audio MIDI settings, there's something that's called aggregate. So you can aggregate any. You can aggregate 5, 6, 7 USB devices into one. So let's say you have 2 devices that come into one. You can take those 2 devices. You can have one that's channel 1, channel 2, either left or right. You can map them that way. Then just go into iMovie, start recording, and it'll record video, and it'll record one channel will be, one interface, and the other channel will be the other interface, and they'll all be synced up into one file. So iMovie with an aggregate audio device and audio MIDI setup will be able to do it for you. Mac's pretty good at that.
Good, Mickey.
Yeah, I would first test out making an aggregate audio device, as Carl mentioned. Do make sure that, because within audio MIDI setup, you can select which of the 2 audio devices would be the master clock for that aggregate audio device. I would make the mix between those 2 sources, the MixPre and the Bluetooth headset. I would make the MixPre the master clock. I don't know if Bluetooth can clock off of that, but do your tests, of course. If Bluetooth cannot clock from the MixPre, I would also experiment with loopback. In terms of what software, I would probably try Softron's movie recorder, which allows you to record multi-channel audio, as many as you want, and you can put in metadata for each channel, each audio channel that you record. And of course, you can also select what codec the video would be recorded in.
Yeah, as an audio device, I think loopback is like the ultimate Swiss Army knife of bringing audio together, remixing it, and putting it back out as a single source that your software can see. Next question.
David Brady, New York, New York. I have an old Arduino device. I built it IR Blast Samsung TVs with channel up. Great for my job when I need to keep an eye on in-house head end. I lost the project and wondering, is there a way to clone, image, or reverse engineer the board?
Good guy.
I don't know about how to do exactly that, but I would recommend getting one of these things instead of messing around with that. This is for $100. You can access a library of thousands of IRs and even learn them. So this is an IP to IR device. So basically, once it learns, or once you choose something from the library, you can be anywhere in the world and you can channel up your Samsung TV. So if you want to be in the other room and push a button, you can just make a button and have that something that just activates. So I wouldn't mess around with the Arduino. I'd just spend the $100 and get this global cache device.
What's it called? Who makes it?
Global cache, and it's called an IP to TCP IP. Let's see, IP to IR ITAC TCP IP. Let's see. here's the link. I'll put a link in the chat. But basically, it takes TCP/IP and converts it to IR, but it also learns it. So if you point a remote control at it, it can take the hexadecimal codes. You'll see them all pop up, and then you can choose what to assign that to another button or push it somewhere else, like Universe, or just develop your own buttons. But I have
just really fascinated by that.
Yeah, this is what they use in Zoom rooms to turn on like projectors. So I could turn on a projector at our conference room and turn it off from here because I grabbed the code. So that's a JSON code, and you can stick it in there. So this is the device that they use all over these are found in conference rooms all over the world.
Yeah, that's really cool. Next question.
Richard Lavery in Belfast, Northern Ireland. What are good earpiece recommendations for giving guests? In particular, if you have multiple guests, one after another in an hour.
Good, Mickey.
I'm assuming that Richard is asking this in context of the IBC broadcast. The solution may not be apt for that because of the time that's required to get these items in. But I order from Alibaba 100-pack of these disposable walkie-talkie in-ears with the acoustic tubes. If you buy them in 100 pieces, it ends up somewhere between US dollars, $1.50 to $2 each. So very affordable. I get them wired for the Motorola CP200s, but you can get them wired for mini jacks as well. But you can get them. You can for IBC you can get like very affordable, just regular earbuds that cost $2 US for IBC.
Good, Courtney.
Using these are HYS, similar to what Mickey says, and they have the acoustical, stretchy, in-ear piece that can be removed. So you can just order this part, which is essentially disposable, or you can assign one to each person and give it to them, and then next time they come, they can just bring their own, and you just slot it in here and turn it. It has a little bayonet connector on it, and then you keep the driver part on your side, and that way they can disinfect their own if they want to and bring it back. Or you can disinfect them as well, since it's just, there's no, in the acoustical part, since it's just a plastic tube, you can maybe boil it in water, put it in hot water, or soak it in alcohol to disinfect it.
Yeah, I don't know if you have time or the budget for it, but the audio implements, what we've used in the past has they come in they're very modular. Audio implements is pretty much what's used for most of broadcast in the United States. So, if you're a host, that's what you're almost always using. And when calling them is like calling a 3-letter agency. They're like, yes, what do you need? And you say, I need a 118 of da, 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 and they go, would you like that for 2 days? And you're like, yes. And then it shows up in your door, but there's not a lot of discussion there. You can order them online. It sometimes gets a little confusing. They come in modules. So you have the cable. The cable can come to a TRS, TS, a variety of different other solutions there. It comes with the actual what's actually making the noise, the against the speaker, I guess is what you would say. It's a little knob that's separate. And then you can get the receiving end of that, which is going to click onto that, and then you can buy the tube, the acoustic tube, and then you can buy the little end earpiece. And so what we do is we just buy everything except for that. We buy 100 of those little end earpieces, and now you have something we just give them to the person, like we don't want them back. And so they're very inexpensive to do it that way. So the actual implement is expensive. It's $120 some or something like that. But the earpieces themselves are easily replaceable and cleanable as well. So that's something else to consider. Next question.
Clive Kitchener from Souk, BC, Canada, wondering how often the professional ears here have their hearing assessed. I was told that equipment used by regular audiologists cannot accurately assess high frequencies. So how do you go about that, learning where you're losing your high end?
Go ahead, Mickey.
How often? Usually once a year, or as the calendar permits. I haven't heard about the inaccuracies of their testing. But I haven't put much thought into it either. I just do it because it's something that Mr. Kurda had told me in the past.
Good, Mitchell.
I've had battles with audiologists over frequencies that you can actually hear. They claim you cannot hear over 10,000 hertz, and I don't believe that, because I hear things. I always have. Other
voices.
than the little voices,
Mostly voices.
I was gonna say, other than the
at a very
whispering
high
voices.
pitch. You hear all the voices are at like 12,000 K, so no one else hears them.
So they can't hear them. And it was funny because I went into the doctor one time and I said, I've got a little tinnitus or something. He said, yeah, I can hear it. So he was assuming that I could actually. So I don't believe anything he says. I've always been able to hear like high frequency transformers, like TV sets, fluorescent tubes. And you almost feel it as a pressure than you do an actual tone or a sound. But it's there. So I agree with the question that if they don't think you can hear over 10,000, then their equipment's not going to be checked out for it. But it's all a mute point, because I can't hear over 10,000 now anyhow.
So you used to be able to. You used to be able to argue with them. Now it's over. Go ahead, John.
I'm sad that your friends are gone, Mitch. But I typically, what I'll do is get my ears checked once a year, and I'll also just use a sine wave generator, see what you can hear. See if there's frequencies that all of a sudden kind of disappear for you. Understand where those gaps are in your hearing and how you're going to kind of come around and compensate for that. Because obviously, if you're running front of sound or mixing anything, you have to be very aware of where your deficits are in your hearing.
I definitely have had issues where we've had audio engineers who I'm clear they can't hear certain things that I'm saying, hey, can you fix that? They're like, it's fine. I'm like, it's not fine. Go ahead, Carl.
As John said, a sine wave generator. I currently have dozens of very expensive sine wave generators that I can actually tell how high I can actually hear on my synthesizers. The thing about synthesizers is you can have different waveforms. So a triangle wave or a sine wave is just essentially one frequency. But if you have a square wave or a sawtooth wave, it has all the harmonics. And depending on how high I go, it'll change from a sawtooth wave to essentially a sine wave, because the harmonics are rolling off with my own hearing. So I'm applying my own high pass filter myself, and the tone will change, and that's how I can tell where my natural roll off is, by just using an analog synthesizer.
Interesting. Good, Courtney.
Yeah, I have mine tested once a year, but as a normal physical, you know what the doctor does? He doesn't use any equipment. He goes behind my head and he takes his fingers and rubs them together like this a number of times. And if you can tell, I don't know if you can even hear that, it's that high frequency. If they do that behind your head and you can tell him how many times he rubbed his fingers together like that, you still have pretty good hearing.
Next question.
By the way, Courtney, he might be just thinking about the bill he's going to send you. Next question from David Brady. Of all the ancient tech I have at the office, none is more beloved than my IBM Model M keyboard. It is the best days of starting my career, and I'll tell the story one day. Are there any proven adapters for the PS2 to USB? The one I have is flakey.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, I don't know what could be causing your flake. I've used these StarTech PS2 to USBs, and there's another one that is both a mouse and keyboard. Maybe the problem you're running into is if they're designed for either mouse or keyboard, they can be problematic. This one's designed for both, and it splits it out so that you can plug a mouse and a keyboard into the same USB connection. But I found them to be fairly reliable. Maybe the connectors are going after a while, or maybe their key switches in your keyboard are starting to go.
Next question.
Paul Valhus from Austin, Texas asked, what's a cool DJ setup under 1K, as portable and self-contained as possible?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of them that the first thing I'm assuming you need, what I don't know is if you need a PA system. So if you're talking about a DJ system, do you need a PA system? Behringer and JBL make ones that have mixers that have powered speakers, and those will be pretty much a turnkey system to make that work. As far as DJing goes, at this point, almost every DJ we see now is using software. There's a lot of different software that you can get for your laptop that is going to be able to play it. It's not, you could probably do it with a B-Link by Courtney, not by Courtney. B-Link, not by Courtney, because Courtney's moved on. There's still a lot of legal separation that has to be finished with the B-Link situation. But a small computer like that can oftentimes put out what you need to make that work. But a small laptop is usually what we see, and there's a variety of DJ software that will make that work. Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, so as Alex said, if you've got your speakers and stuff sorted out, then Roland's system, which uses Serato software, the DVS software. So it is you are controlling software in essence. You don't have to. You can actually load it up onto this on CD players as well. But this is pretty much, it's got its own drum machine built in. So this is pretty much just everything in one box. You get a software license, so you can use the Serato software license, and then just add speakers and lights to your taste.
Hey, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is a big industry out there, and a lot of people want to do this. So you can both look at mobile DJ stuff, and you'll get all sorts of recommendations for both software and the hardware systems. Typically, for DJing, you want some sort of low-end driver, so you want a couple of speakers and a subwoofer that gives it that punch for dancing and things like that. The other thing I'd look into is look in the karaoke space, because they make tons of portable systems, even down into low numbers, that for a small party or something like that would probably do fine. It has all the same basic things, plus the ability to play back those karaoke tracks, but you don't have to use it for that. It's just basically speakers and a system, sometimes even in one portable system that you can take around. That might serve your needs if you have modest needs.
Okay, John.
There's an iPad app called DJay, and it has like a nice auto mix feature. A K12, and that would be a really good way to start, like a QSC K12 for a small kind of event, and you can just keep adding from there.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I think it's also good to point out there are different, I don't know how you call it, like styles of DJing. There are people that like to, trigger samples through something like Ableton with something like a Novation Launchpad that has, 64 pads. There are DJs that like to just play music similar to what you would use the tool that Carl showed, what you would do there. And there are DJs that simply play back vinyl and beat match between two different tracks from different records. So you can, one option, I guess, is to use vinyl players with a little crossfader mixer.
MK1200. That's what a lot of us used for a long time. Is the 1200s were what a lot of us used in the 30 years ago, but they still make them, I think, or they make some version of them at this point. So you can go analog there. I definitely see, when we see them at events, DJ Pro is a pretty popular track door. Pro is a very popular one, and then the higher end DJs generally have Ableton, like the ones that are really pushing the outer envelope of stuff are oftentimes using Ableton or even sometimes Pro Tools. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asked, I've noticed that many cable systems outside of the Chicago area carry WGN's Chicago News as part of their programming. Why could that be?
I'll go ahead, Mitchell.
Douglas, a lot of the cable companies have own pieces of broadcasting organizations, and it may be the same with WGN. I agree. Their superstation and their news tends to show up everywhere. So I suspect that people like Comcast and Spectrum and Time Warner, they all have a little piece of that action, and that's why they're running it.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
I think if I remember correctly, WGN was part of Ted Turner's network at the time, and he wanted a universal cable station that it was an independent, and because it didn't have a network affiliate at the time, they could put it on all the individual cable systems across the country without interfering with the CBS, NBC, and ABC licensing deals. So I think that was one reason why it showed up on a lot of cable systems. I think they made it available for a fairly cheap rate, if not free, to get coverage from the Chicago area across the world.
Next question.
Next question in from Alexander Knight, and he's in Vancouver, BC, Canada, and also here in the panel. I tried the Linsol IEMs that Office Hours has suggested. I tried all of the silicone tips, and none of them were comfortable. Felt like they would not go all the way in and seal properly. Any alternative silicone tips to try?
Go ahead, Mickey.
This isn't really answering a question because what I would recommend are foam tips. I like the company Comply. They do sell foam tips for the KZ line of in-ears. They're very comfortable because you essentially compress them, put them in your ears, and they expand to fit the shape of your ear. So they seal very well and are comfortable because they're shaped to exactly what you need.
Harshid?
Recently, I bought Moondrop shoes. They're $20, but they have a spring tip ear tip. So you might give them a try just for the ear tip itself. In the audiophile earbud game, there's a lot of companies out there. So a lot of people do like the Moondrop ear tips because they're spring loaded, supposedly. And to get it cheaper, buy the $20 Moondrop shoes, and you'll get them with it.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, so I bought these to test, and I want to basically use these for guests, and I just thought it was a little weird that none of the tips seemed, when I tested them on my own ears, they didn't go all the way in, so that's why I was asking. I guess the other issue, too, is if people that are coming in are going to be using this, I need an assortment of different tips to accommodate for different ear shapes, too, because if none of these are going to work, I don't want to be in a situation where the guest that comes in says, I can't use these, they're not comfortable.
Yeah, and it also, there's a level of what is comfortable. Like some of it is getting used to it. As someone who wears them every day, all day, or much of the day, you get used to having them in there. I think that one of the things that the audio implements does well is they have a pack of things that are very thin, hard ones, all the way up to what we call the Christmas trees, which are, they'll just kind of go in and at however far you can fit into your ear, and you just press them in. And the hard part is that most people who aren't used to putting in-ear monitors in their ears will not put them in far enough, or think that that it's not working, and you just kind of have to sometimes have kind of a heavy hand and just kind of push them in. Like that's where they go. But you have to be very careful, because if their ear's too small, then they don't want to be on the show anymore. Next question.
Jeffrey Powers from Madison, Wisconsin. Yololiv Yolobox announced they're developing a DSLR camera called the YoloCam, and looking for suggestions on what to include on it. What would be your ideal options on a device like that?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, autofocus would be one necessary thing, I would think, and both HDMI and USB out, so it could become a USB webcam emulation and HDMI simultaneously, so you have a signal out both of those ports at the same time, and an audio input so that you can pipe audio from a microphone or a mix panel into the HDMI out or the USB out as well.
Go ahead, John.
A line in and Super 35 sensor would be amazing. EF mount would be even better.
Guy.
Yeah, I guess a way to actually switch, because that's what they're known for, is the ability to have multiple cameras and switch. So, but when you start touching a camera, you could potentially be rocking it. So every touch can be, especially if you're zoomed in, accentuate. So there was a camera a long time ago by Samsung that's similar. So this didn't make it. This is an Android camera with a 4G LTE, and I actually used this at NAB one year, and people were blown away that I was able to get content up super fast, but it was because there was an editor in this thing. So you could shoot video, you could edit it, and I had an After Effects animation that I transferred onto it, and then you could upload it. So I was uploading a video while I was walking back to our booth. So I was lucky enough to get to the Blackmagic booth at 8:50 a.m., shoot an interview, and have it uploading by 9 a.m. as I walked to our booth. So I think that's what they want to do, is they want to make something like this, but it didn't succeed in the market, and that's with Samsung. So I don't know if what they're thinking. They're doing the right thing though by asking the community for feedback. And so the link in Jeffrey's post isn't working, but I'll put one in chat. There's like 80 comments of people saying what to do, and I don't know. I think they're going to wind up in that YouTube channel. What's it called? Like what happened to that camera? Like the Dalsa and some of these cameras that just failed because they didn't listen and they didn't know the market.
Yeah, Carl.
So we need to remember that a camera is pretty useless without lenses. So if they're talking about having interchangeable lenses, they've either got to build their own lens system completely or give a lot of money to a company that has done it. So Blackmagic has done this. People forget that Blackmagic and Zcam are two companies that have ponied up a lot of money into the mounts that they get. So Blackmagic has to give a lot of money to Canon, and they actually part of the Micro Four Thoughts consortium. So they actually They're actually part of that consortium. They joined that consortium a long time ago. So you can't just pick a lens mount and put it on. You're not allowed to do that. They belong to the companies. So Sony spent the last 9 years building their own. They have them an ultra lens mount, of course, that they adapted into their E-mount. But you can't just say, I'm going to use the F mount. You've got to give like hundreds of millions of dollars to Canon to do that, or Nikon, or Arri if you're going to use a PL mount. So all these mounts have, they have patents on them. And that's why Arri did the Coke connection, the T connection for Coke, so they could actually get the patent redone, put the electronic connection in the PL mount from 1984. So the interesting thing is a lens mount. It doesn't matter about the camera, it's what lens goes on it. If they do a fixed lens, they may have to.
I think that this is a money pit for them. Just to be honest, I mean, I just think the chances of them getting something that people are happy with, the kind of person that wants a DSLR, the kind of, I would just get really good at integrating with another camera. Going head to head with camera manufacturers have been doing this for a long time. Seems like it would be a good idea, but it just seems like I think they'll spend hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars and not get a big output out of it. That's my opinion. Next question.
Chris Widener from Lafayette, Indiana. Matterport's Pro 3 seems interesting. 300 feet coverage in 20 seconds seems really fast. Does anyone know what level of detail can it capture?
Yeah, I looked at this. I have to admit that I'd probably be a little bummed if I bought a used BLK 360, which I think that this is probably a partnership between Matterport and Leica. So Leica makes the BLK 360. This is what looks to be a lower resolution, lower cost version. This is about $4,000. And if I hadn't bought if I bought a new BLK 360 for $20,000, I'd probably be bummed. I spent a little bit more than this one for the used version. And so I don't feel too bad because it's still a lot more detail. There's a big difference between the $20,000 and this $6,000 Matterport Pro. 100,000 points per second. The BLK 360 is 1 million points a second, and so it is a slightly different capacity here. Accuracy is a bit lower. Could you get something that would be good for bigger tours and out? What they're trying to solve is that the Matterports themselves don't work very well outside. So the earlier Matterports, the way that they work, their technology doesn't work very far in large spaces and doesn't go outside. So they kind of really use the BLK 360. They recommended it. I think that what they probably did, looking at the mechanics of and I just saw it after Chris asked, I think that they partnered with Leica to fit something that was going to be less expensive than a BLK 360 that they could put their brand on, and Leica doesn't have to put its brand on. But you don't come up with these kind of LiDAR systems by yourself. So I think that this is probably a Leica mechanics run at a lower quality rate than the BLK 360. I think I'd love to test it against what I have. I think it could be very useful for. Almost every show that I do now, part of why I got the scanner is because I want 3D data of almost everything so that I can, it's so much easier to figure out load in and where you're going to build things and how you're going to customize things and where you're going to put the cameras and the lights and everything else. And these scanners are incredibly powerful to do that. So a $6,000 scanner that would do this, if it worked well, would be definitely worth it for most people to get for if you're doing events. If you're doing anything at a location, being able to go in and grab that location it's not going to be enough for you to get. It's not going to be enough data to do visual effects. It's not going to be enough data to do BIM, or any kind of engineering. But it could be enough for visualization and just basically knowing what you're working with. Next question.
Stefan Fischer from Würzburg, Germany. Is there an audio library somewhere with different kinds of audible artifacts that can be happening in an untreated room? How do standing waves sound, for example? How does sound reflections from the ceiling, etc.?
Go ahead, Carl.
So a lot of this has to do with the person in the room because we have two ears that are on two different sides of our head, and that actually makes up these kind of artifacts that we hear in rooms, like these kind of reflections. The other thing is if you're a professional, so if you're the person whose job it is to make this thing sound good and you're getting paid to do that, you'll find the solution. And you'll find someone who help you find a solution. You'll look wherever you can because your job is to make it sound good. If it doesn't, then they look at you. So as a professional over the years, you'll learn what the problem is, you'll learn very quickly because you would have solved this problem in the past or something very similar. So the more and more you do it, the more and more you can actually process of elimination of getting the sound to sound good and getting rid of the problems. So it's hard to actually say, I'm going to record this and teach someone from it. You can have an apprentice with you and you can be an apprentice yourself learning this from a master who's been doing it for many years, but you've really got to hear it yourself and you've really got to know the solutions. This comes with experience. It's just one of those things. And you'll go back to it. And this is kind of where, if you're a professional and you're doing it for a living, you'll know the solution fast because that's your job. Your job is to get this thing sorted out and on the road.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, nothing beats being in actual physical spaces and hearing what a space sounds like. But you might also want to try getting an audio recording that you created that's very dry, and get plugins like Altiverb from Audio Ease. And Audio Ease also has a plugin called Indoor, or maybe Waves IR1, a reverb plugin that takes in impulse responses. And those plugins usually allow you to dial in how much dry signal you hear, how much early reflections you hear, and how much reverb tail you hear. And you can balance those out and listen and see, oh, that's what an early reflection in a bathroom sounds like. That's an early reflection. This is what a reverb tail in a large parking garage sounds like. Check out Indoor, because Indoor is pretty cool. Again, this is from Audio Ease. You can drag the position of the source within essentially a 3D layout of a space like a house. You can drag around where the source is and also where the virtual microphone is. And you can hear what a loud person in the living room sounds like if you're in a bathroom, and you can balance out those kinds of reverbs. It's a good, I think it may be a good way to help visualize what you're hearing.
Go ahead, Bill.
Mickey's given you some excellent advice. To be honest with you, it's tough to train your ears to hear all these little things. I mean, most of us, it took decades of listening carefully to understand that as I move through a room, there are areas where certain frequencies, maybe it's bass, maybe it's mid-range, maybe it's treble, it gets a little bit enhanced in this particular spot and a little bit diminished in a different spot. And that's generally because certain frequency waveforms are either matching and increasing their amplitude as the waves get right in sync, or they're getting diminished because they go directly out of phase. It is something that takes training your ear to do, and it is so complex that I just think you have to spend some time doing it. Mickey gave you some great suggestions as to how to kind of create that and hear it. I know I didn't really understand what phase cancellation sounded like until one day I was trying to record somebody with a lavalier, and somebody walked up to them, and we had two microphones open going toward each other. And the sound that I heard as those two lavaliers got near, as these two people were getting close to each other, just made the audio sound really weird for a moment. And it just suddenly struck me, that's phase cancellation. It's classic. And I have to look for that from now on and understand that the sound I just heard is something going wrong.
Go, John.
Yeah, when I started off at YouTube a lot, right? So there's a lot of great videos out there. Dave Ratt makes a series of videos around audio that really opened up my eyes to start understanding the physics of what's happening around me. And once you can start understanding why it's happening, then you can start understanding what you actually need to do to correct it versus just, hey, I can hear this, but what does that actually mean?
Courtney?
One thing I discovered after years and years of working as a production sound mixer is listening in mono. Because you'll hear something in those mono headsets that the director goes, what? I don't hear that sound. What? Why is there a problem? Why are you hearing something none of the rest of us are hearing? And I put the headphones on them, and they go, oh yeah, now I hear it. And I think what the problem is, because your brain, it's your brain. You got to get rid of your brain. Your brain tunes out certain sounds based on its directionality, and it determines directionality by phase difference between your left and your right ear. And if you're feeding a mono signal, the same exact signal, into both ears at the same time, your brain cannot localize a specific sound, so you hear all the sound at once and it doesn't tune any of it out. So then you can hear something actually as the recording hears it, because no brain is filtering it out on that recording. So that way you can you have a better chance of finding the little nitpicky things that your brain will ignore if you're listening with just one ear or listening through stereo headphones. So that's my tip: is use a tip sleeve plug on your headphones and make sure the same signal is feeding to both ear cups and they're over the ear.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I'd say like generally, yeah, maybe hang out or apprentice perhaps with someone who deals with this on a daily basis, and be a sponge and soak in what they have to work through, and that's a good way to get experience without throwing yourself like a head first into something that could be detrimental to a production.
I completely agree. I think that you really have to figure out ways to intern somewhere, and doing something where you're not accountable for it yet, but you are able to be exposed to it is probably one of the most overlooked opportunities. And there's usually opportunities around to do this. Many of my things have always been like, well, I'm just going to figure this out. I'm not going to do it for money. This office hours is a big internship for me. so where I don't know how to do it, but we'll figure it all out, and all of us are figuring it out together. Next question.
And Douglas Carmichael asks, what techniques have helped you get through difficult situations during the course of a production when you're frustrated?
Go ahead, Carl.
Asking questions. So finding someone who may know the answer or who may have been through it before and asking them, how do I do this? Don't try to figure it out on your own if you don't have to.
The big thing is not to resist what's so. Like I think that is one of the hardest things that people get into is they are resisting what is happening as opposed to working on it. And so the thing that we see the most when people flip out, they leave an event, they get angry, they do all these other things. It's mostly that they're resisting what is happening, and that resistance makes them upset. There's no resistance in fixing the problem. There's resistance in thinking that this shouldn't have been the way that it is. But it is the way it is, and resisting it doesn't really help. It just slows things down and makes everybody upset. And so really, what you want to be looking for is at every moment. If you look at a great running back, at every moment they're not just sitting down going, well, the blockers didn't block very well. Like I'm just going to fall down on the ground. They're going to they're going to keep on looking for a gap. They're going to keep And one thing we say oftentimes is keep moving your legs. Just keep pumping your legs through it and looking for the gap of how it's going to work. And it's not always going to work, but resisting what is so is really where people get themselves into trouble. Go ahead, Mickey. And this is in everything.
Yeah. In the production world, it's not all like good productions. You take the good with the bad. And if you have productions that are not, going as well as you would have expected, and you reach the point where you're frustrated, like quite frankly, I think of the deadline, the delivery, the wrap, and the paycheck, and moving on to the next exciting thing.
Yeah, exactly. Good guy.
Yeah, there's a book by Jocko Willink. He's a Navy SEAL. It's Extreme Ownership. I'd suggest reading through that. There's some good stuff in there, but one of them is just slow it down. Like sometimes you just got to not be moving so fast, slow it down, and prioritize. So you got to figure out, am I trying to make a good show? Okay, if that's the overall goal, is to make a good show, have a good show, then slow it down and see if there's something that you can prioritize that's going to make it still a good show. Because the minute you start grabbing and unraveling things and something else cascades and fails, and you just opened up a can of worms. But yeah, there's, like Mickey said, definitely going to be productions where there's some harsh stuff going on. And I look forward to I go to the YMCA and they have a sauna. So I just try to remember, breathe. They call it box breathing. So I'll practice breathing in the sauna. And I'll just get in that state of, trying to slow it down and not move too fast and make a mistake.
Yeah, you definitely have to be pretty ruthless about what you cut out. When things are going wrong, like you have to get to a point where you're making decisions like, well, we're not going to be able to do this, 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 and this. And we're going to now pull our elbows in and just make sure that we get out the other side. And to get back to what Guy was saying, minimal viable product. Like, what do we actually have to get done? What do we have to get out the door? The thing to always remember also is that a lot of times the viewer's never going to know. We talked about it yesterday. I had something where the fiber melted. I've had many things. And in fact, if you ever get to sit in a truck or you ever get to sit in a big production, there's things going wrong the whole time. like people are losing cameras, they're losing comms, they're losing playback, and the question is did they build enough redundancy and did they have enough experts in it so that they can make sure that the final product may not be as good as what we imagined, but is still great for the actual viewer. Go ahead, Mickey.
And yeah, just to add on to what I mentioned earlier, I'm saying this from the point of view as a single tech or a single department head. Like even though you are not you're excited to finish the project or the production, you still deliver no matter what, no matter how sick and tired you are of the production or whatever. You still do the best that you can. You still deliver, and then if you do not want to work with the production company anymore, then you don't. But you still do your job.
It's one of the wonders of doing production is that both the producers and the people and the crew get to re-choose, often. so whether they're going to do that again. Next question.
Santa Bart Gaffney from Oconomowoc. I think that's Wisconsin. No question, just a shout out. Thanks for the heads up on the ILM Disney Plus docuseries. I'm enjoying it immensely.
So great. I'm about to go watch it again just to kind of make sure I got every little bit out of it. It's just an amazing documentary, both in the production quality as well as the content. Last question for the first hour.
And Paul Valhus from Austin, Texas. Do you agree with this article that Apple is dying and with the name of the process? And there's a link to it.
Bill, real quick.
I didn't read the article, but that Mac right there, I bought in 1984. And I started a little fun game about maybe 5 years later, which is every time I read an article that said the Mac was going to die and go away, I would try to buy some stock. I haven't been able to keep that up through the years. But if I had done that, even a single share, I would probably be retired by now, because I've been about 25 cycles through this, reading some article on the internet about how Apple is going to implode and go away. And every single time for 25 years, they've just come back stronger. I'm not saying that'll happen till the end of time, but right now, the winning bet has been betting on them continuing to innovate and improve.
Go ahead, Courtney.
I don't necessarily agree that Apple is dying. I read part of the article. I think Apple has been brilliant at doing a couple of things, is marketing and maintaining a profit margin, and marketing a utilitarian product like a computer as more of a fashion statement, as more of an elite tool, as an item that is to be like a Mercedes is a car, just like a Chevy is, but they can sell it for a lot more money because it appeals to a certain level of clientele, and that's what Apple has gone after. They've found their market, the market that's willing to pay 40% profit above, for utilitarian stuff, and wants to do it for the cachet that the brand brings. And I think they've been successful at marketing at that. As they've tried to broaden their coverage, to expand their market some, it dilutes a little bit of that cachet, but they've been able to manage to stay out of that competition and not competing with the other bargain basement products out there to try and invade that market. They've maintained their elevated status and can then maintain their profit margin, which is why they are such a rich company.
Yeah, I mean, the problem that they have is that they don't really have any competition. So they're not I kind of scanned through the article because it came in a little later, but I did scan through it, and they're not a monopoly unless you use really creative ideas of defining a monopoly. A monopoly is something that has absolute control of the market, and they don't have absolute control of any of their markets. So you might consider Google and Apple a duopoly, but Apple is definitely not a monopoly with less than 50% of the global market and only maybe a little bit more than 50% of the local market. So it's just really hard to define it that way. But you have to be very creative to say that they're a monopoly to make that work. The other thing is that the fragmentation and just instability of almost everything else they're competing with, they're kind of like a pro player playing in high school, and so while that pro player doesn't have to be the best pro player that's out there playing, they're just way better than everybody else because fragmentation has just devastated both the Android and the Windows platform. Go ahead, Courtney.
One thing I think how they've been able to succeed for so long is they've been able to take other people's ideas as far as the design concept
and make them work.
And innovation. Is take other people's ideas, make them work, and where they make almost all their money is on the store, is selling other people's software that works in the Apple universe.
Their hardware is still 70% of their revenue.
Wait a minute. They're taking 30%.
No, but their hardware is still 70%.
All the other work that all those other people do, and they have no effort to create it other than putting it on the store. And they use that and the closed system to bring people into their hardware, where they sell the hardware that runs everybody else's software.
It takes a lot of work to make the hardware platform that would make that actually work. And that's the thing that people miss. And as someone who used to sell software, I just have to say that 30% pretty cheap for what they do. Like we had to, I used to have to sell software. It was, 22 or 24% from Digital River. And that wasn't really controlling, all of your, controlling who had access and everything else. 30% is a pretty good deal. Go ahead, Bill.
The other thing I think they don't get, they got a lot of credit for it, but I think we can't argue with is their idea of the human interface becoming as frictionless as possible. They've worked ridiculously hard from the early days when you want to get rid of the document, throw it in a trash can. I know that's icons, and I know other people did icons before, but spreading that kind of idea is what led to the phone, where let's get rid of all the buttons, let's make this interface as simple as possible, as modal as possible.
Yeah.
And it also looked cool, but it worked brilliantly, and after 5 minutes holding it in your hand, you could get stuff done. How many other complex, super complex devices has anybody ever been able to say that about? And suddenly every phone looks like an iPhone.
Yeah, we could do this for the next hour.
For decades.
This is definitely one, so we'll leave this one go. But we'll talk about it again. This is a good after hours discussion. Or if we get to it earlier in the day, like in the morning, we'll talk about it longer. Sunday is a good day to ask this question again. All right. We're now jumping into the second hour. We had had something else. John, did you want to say one thing? John was like, oh, what did he? Go ahead.
54% of Apple's revenue is iPhone, 9% wearables, 9% iPad, 10% for the Mac, 19% of the services. That's the revenue break.
There you go. And those services, I mean, the App Store is actually less than half of that services. So it's a very small percentage of.
And any one of those businesses would be a category leader if they were spun off by themselves.
Yeah. So all right, now we're jumping into the second hour, and we had another person or another company to come on, and they needed to reschedule. So we're jumping to what I think is actually going to be an incredible second hour. We kind of got into it. I think some of our first hour stuff was kind of touching on this, but this is really audio pathology. How do we figure out, what's working, what's not working, and really be able to hear it and be able to figure out the solution for it. So I think it's going to be really great. I'm not going to get off to a general panel discussion. We have so many questions lining up. We'll wax on afterwards if we don't run out of questions. So if you've got questions about how to figure this out, how to work through these things, go ahead and throw those questions into Makana, and we'll jump right into the questions. Let's go with the next question, Mitch.
First one in from Vienna Tran in Australia. For public speaking engagements, I'm recording audio on my iPhone with a lapel microphone and syncing it in my DSLR's video. What are the best ways to sync and post? What pitfalls should I look out for?
Good, Bill.
The two classic ways of doing double system sound, which you have audio on one thing and video on another, is to look for visual cues. And that's why the clapboard was traditionally popular in double system on movie sets, because that spike in the audio of the clapper closing gave you a point to sync video and audio. If you don't have something like that, if you haven't had somebody clap their hands or you can't find, you have to kind of look into the recording stream and see things. Maybe the P plosive sound or a T or something that's identifiable, and then use that to sync between the video and audio. And hopefully, if your sample rates are correct, once you do that sync once, it'll remain for the rest of the document.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Since you mentioned best way, you can get a timecode generator such as the timecode Systems UltraSync 1s or even the Tentacle Sync. Both of them have applications that they can sync to that can record the audio as well as stripe that recording with time code. You can then take another time code generator and slap that on the camera to record time code there as well. And both audio and video recorders would have time code, which you can then use to sync up and post. Bar that, yes, simple slate wherein you recite what you are recording for each take that you do, and then do either an actual clap with the slate or a hand clap to give you a sync reference is something you can do as well.
Good, Courtney.
And if your DSLR has microphones in it, which most of them do these days, make sure they're turned on so that you have a guide track or a cue track on your video, and then you can just take your high quality track that comes from the lavalier and sync it up with the audio, just line it up with the audio, and there's a lot of editing software will do that automatically for you. It'll look at the waveforms of your guide track and look at the waveforms from your ISO track and sync them up. And a pitfall is to know what sample rate you can be working with in post and make sure that your recorder is working at that sample rate, 48K, for example, in the same bit depth, either 16-bit or 24-bit, and try and record in the same sample rate that your camera records its PCM audio in. That way you'll have less issues with trying to sync up different sample rates in the same timeline.
Good, Bill.
And if you need something really quick, you can hold your hand up and snap your fingers. That click sound is made by the finger hitting the pad of your hand. So if you don't have anything else, just a quick that should give you something in slow motion you can sync to.
Good, Mickey.
Yeah, I forgot to mention pitfalls. I would definitely do test recordings with your audio system. A lot of people that do this just assume that it always works. Like plug it in, put the mic on, record, and it's good. Do test recordings so that you're sure that if ever you have more complex wardrobe, that you aren't getting any cloth rustle on it, and also if you're outdoors, that you don't get make sure that you don't get wind noise on the microphone element. And yeah, if you are outdoors, do bring either foams or little micro wind jammers for the lavalier. Another thing as well, if you're gonna do if you do not have the setup yet, the actual lavalier, I would lean towards getting a system that is actually designed to be used with a mobile device. There are ones from companies like Apogee or Rode that work well. That way, if you go with that, you don't have to deal with like, oh, I need this adapter to TRRS and all that, because it's already designed to be used with a mobile device.
And when you do clapping, if you're going to do clapping, make sure that you can see the hands come together. Some people do this thing where their one hand is in front of the other one, and there's a couple frames there. It could be. So you have to be kind of careful of that as well. Oftentimes, we also will get people to say Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers at the very beginning, because your peas, there's really only one shape for your mouth to do those. And so if we ask them to do that right before they do it, if there's someone we know, we don't ask random strangers to do that. It's really easy for us to make sure that we're really getting down to the precision that we'd like to get in that area. Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer from Viera, Florida. How would you make a Zoom presenter more intelligible? Assume no language issues. Thanks.
Go ahead, Carl.
So if you take a look at all of us here on office hours, our microphones are relatively close to our mouths. So that cutting down the distance between your mouth and the microphone is number one. So proximity, so essentially mic technique. The other one is making sure that the noise cancellation isn't working too hard. So generally, if you have noise cancellation on in Zoom, you want it set to low and then get rid of all other noises. So usually computer fans, light fans, those kind of things, like a ceiling fan will be okay on low. But if you have to crank it up to medium or high, then you've got too much noise coming into that room. So get rid of some of the noises. Usually an aircon usually will be okay if you have it on low, but you shouldn't have medium or high noise reduction on, because it just says that there's this attack that happens, the noise reduction attack, and definitely not have it on auto. Auto is like the worst thing ever. But there's this attack that happens. You hear it on some of the people here in office hours. That becomes, it's really, if someone's just answering like a question, a few sentences, that's a little bit. But if you're a 10, 15-minute presentation, it gets grating. That's all.
Good, Bill.
If you get to do it in post, adding a little upper mid-range and or high frequencies can sometimes make things like fricatives, S sounds, things that can get buried in a big booming voice in a booming room, a little more present can help with those articulation cues.
Next question.
Josh Kaufman from Pittsburgh, PA. My list of audio failure points: capture methodology, correct mic selection execution, signal to noise, background noise, preamp quality, sample fidelity, low bit rate, excessive compression, gain staging, impedance matching, and panelist thoughts. What are they?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Another thing, a great list there of things to look at. Another thing you want to watch out for is inductive noise. And a lot of people don't pay attention to this when they run cables. Never run your cables parallel with your AC lines, especially if you've got any high voltage transformers or anything for any like HMI lighting, because they can radiate square waves, which are really nasty and get into audio very quickly, just over induction. As well as make sure all the shields are good on your cables, because they deteriorate over time. That's the right word, yeah. And and they can break down and break halfway down. It may still be connected at the connector. You can examine the ends of the connector and say, well, the shield's connected on both ends. But halfway down that braided shield, it's broken down and corroded, and so make sure that your cables are all good and the shields are all well designed and in good shape.
Good, Carl.
So I'll speak to gain staging. A good way to approach gain staging is work backwards. So let's say you're doing a front of house live. So you want to set your amplifiers that are running your speakers at front of house and your amplifiers that are running your monitor mixers at the front, set them to zero, essentially zero gain. So you're not going to add anything or anything. That is going to be essentially at unity gain for those amplifiers. If you don't know what the unity gain is, it's 1/8 power for amplifier. 1/8 power is unity gain for an amplifier. Then just work your way backwards. So then you got your output, your main output, set your main output to zero, then set all your channel outputs to zero for all the microphones. Now your mix will be different, of course, but we're just trying to get unity gain here. And so you'll notice that the very first thing you got to change is, and the only thing you need to change is actually the gain knob. So this is the actual where the microphone comes into an analog preamp. It could be in the desk, it could be in a stage box, wherever it is, and that stage box could be controlled from your desk digitally, but it's actually an analog, in a stage box. And that's one you'll need to adjust. And a good rule of thumb is know your microphones, look up the actual data sheet for the microphone. On the data sheet of the microphone, it will say sensitivity, it will say -53, set your gain to +53. That's where you start. Simply, that's exactly what the manufacturer has done there. It takes 53 dB to get that thing back up to, unity gain. Then the only difference there is going to be the impedance matching. So the impedance determines how actual sensitive, how efficient the microphone is. And so this is where you need a 10-to-1. So you need to make sure that your preamp is 10 times greater impedance than your microphone. So if your microphone has 100 ohms, your preamp wants to be 1,000. Most preamps are going to be 1,500 to 3,000 for phantom power. And then line level will be, 10,000 or 20,000 ohms. So they're the ones you want to work backwards. Have everything set to unity gain backwards. And then the only thing you should adjust to get your volume right will be the gain knob, which is the very first step.
Go, Nikki.
Just to comment on what Carl had mentioned. Yes, I agree that you set unity gain on the way into, say, your board, and you adjust your input gain to get you the level that you want at the board. But on the way out, though, you do essentially the reverse. You have hopefully a nice mix that takes advantage of your dynamic range on the way out, and you adjust your final amplifiers to compensate for your speaker system and the room that your system is in. Because not all the time you want to run your final amplifiers at unity gain. You want to do that adjustment at the final stage. I do want to say though that the one thing that it's not audio specific, but in many productions there is I've seen a lack of coordination of wireless systems, and that if you are using wireless in your audio system, then that could gravely affect what you're doing, both for your microphones and also any wireless in-ear monitors that you may be using or any wireless comms. So coordinate with all departments that are using anything wireless, from the camera department that may have, wireless fizz systems or wireless video transmission systems. Coordinate with your security department that might have walkie-talkies. make sure all the wireless that you are using is taken into account whenever you set up your wireless microphones, because it could very well be detrimental and could ruin a show.
Go ahead. Sorry, Alex.
Yeah, and building on what Carl said about gain staging, which is an excellent explanation. In live sound, we have to be really careful also about how we EQ as well, because you have to remember little incremental adjustments. If you start boosting signal, you're adding gain to the signal. So if you've done your gain staging properly and you don't have any feedback, as soon as you start adding EQ into the situation, it can complicate things. And as opposed to music production, we tend to be a lot more surgical and cut frequencies rather than boost. So this is just something to be mindful of.
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, Mickey brought up an important point about wireless coordination. And another thing to remember is even if your wireless is coordinated and you're on different frequencies and you've checked all that, bear in mind that distance and wireless transmitters and receivers makes a big difference. Distance of just a foot or 6 inches can make a big difference in whether a receiver works or it doesn't. If you have a transmitter that's located close to a receiver, that transmitter can swamp your receiver. Even though that transmitter is on a completely different frequency, it can swamp the front end of your receiver and reduce its signal-to-noise ratio so that it'll have a very difficult time picking out its required frequency because it's being swamped by, let's say, a walkie-talkie. You have PAs standing next to your wireless receivers and talking to the, back to the home base. They can really screw up your reception and reduce your signal-to-noise ratio on your receiver, and you'll get hits or dropouts on your receiver. So be careful about placing a receiver and a transmitter very close together. It comes especially true on wireless cameras where they're transmitting wireless image out of the camera. If it's not incorporating that sound into the wireless transmitter stream, which would be the best way to do it, and so you have a separate audio transmitter on that camera, let's say, or a receiver on that camera, to receive your audio to go to a guide track. You got to be careful that your receiver isn't mounted right up next to the transmitter that's transmitting that video image back to Video Village, because, like I say, it'll really reduce the sensitivity of that receiver, and you may find that your guide track is coming and going away because it's being swamped by that video transmitter.
Next question.
Morgan Price from Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. What is your approach for improving sound for presenters who are coming into Zoom? I'm thinking beyond mic, headphones, and more monitor positions, blankets, pillows to reduce reverb before an event around the desk setup.
Good, Bill.
Yeah, we talk all the time about sound treatment, and if you're thinking about how to do that, a couple of things. Picking the room itself, you may not have a choice, and I get that. You may have to come from your desk, and your desk may be in a certain, an 8x10 room, and that's all you've got. And if so, that's fine. I'm working in an 8x10 room, and so the things that I have done is I didn't put my setup against one flat wall with another flat wall behind me that's not treated, so that the possibility of a standing wave increases there. I've moved my setup so it's at an angle, and in fact, behind me there is a corner. Whoops, this side. Behind me, this is a corner, and you'll see that there's curtains hanging there. Well, that's because I wanted a little dampening in that corner. So I'm thinking about the geometry of my room, and I'm trying to pick a room that doesn't have the worst characteristics. Sometimes I've seen people with their streaming setup at home, and they put it in like some sort of great room on a desk, and it's got a high ceiling, and there's just echo galore in there. It's very hard to treat a huge room like that. In a smaller room, you have less area to go into to treat.
Good, Mitchell.
Yeah, I would treat the room first and then select the microphone. I know you want it out of the equation, but it's an important part of the equation because if your room is live, even after you've treated it, you're not going to be able to use a large diameter condenser microphone, maybe like a PR40, something you have to work closer in order to eliminate the off-access sound. So the two working in concert with each other is important.
Good, Carl.
For me, so this room is heavily diffused, but a couple of weeks ago you would have heard me come in from the echo chamber underneath Capitol Records. The other thing is if I'm helping someone over Zoom come in as a presenter. So if my job is to remotely help someone sound better, then there's a few things I'll do. One, they would have headphones, like even AirPods, but I'm not going to get them to use the microphone of the AirPods. Most laptops these days have pretty good microphones in front of them. So I'm going to get them relatively close to the laptop where they're not kind of, in God mode. And then they use the microphone in the laptop. I'm going to ask them, hey, do you have any curtains? Can you face the curtains? You can have them open or closed, but facing the curtains helps. So if I'm helping someone, I'm going to have them speaking towards something that's a little bit plush, and I'm also going to have them making sure that I have open speakers. That's a killer for Zoom. Open speakers is a big killer for actually becoming intelligent. As far as trying to understand what they're trying to say. So echo cancellation is the death of most presentations.
Yeah, you can't have full duplex without it, without everybody being on a headset. So we definitely focus heavily on getting earphones into people's ears, getting them on an Ethernet so that they're not breaking up they have to be on an Ethernet connection, and getting them to turn their Wi-Fi off to make sure that they're on Ethernet. We send out mics. That's the number one thing we do. I will say, even we tested, by the way, we got the new T-Bone here. Gain on the USB will work for me, but not for sending out to a civilian. so these the gain is too low on these on the USB output.
You have to adjust it in Core Audio. So I should have said that.
I know, but the problem is I can't send. Again, I can do that. I can't send this out. It just becomes it's not something I can send to a civilian. So we did test that one. The MV7 is still, after all these mics, still the one that we will continue to send out because it makes most of the issues that we have with the room go away. Is it perfect? No. Is it way better than generally what everybody else has? Yes. And so trying to triage the situation makes it better. The other thing you have to look at when beyond headphones, Ethernet, and a good mic, it's really hard to get a presenter, unless they're really serious, to do much more than that. They already think you're crazy. Like these are a little crazy, kind of crazy, really crazy. And then if you keep on asking them to can you put up blankets, or can you do something else? If they're serious and they really want to get the most out of it, you might be able to keep on going down that path. And that's more of a soft skill, like where are they, and so on and so forth. One of the reasons that I show up in a system that looks like this, and I have for a long time, and I took it very seriously, is that when someone gets on and goes, wow, I want to look like that, I want to sound like that, then we now have an opening to have that conversation about what it takes to actually do that, and how they have to treat their room, and how they have to, and you'll end up with a handful of them that really want to push that extra mile, but you won't know that if you're coming in over not a good system on your own. So having good lighting and mics and everything else is really important for you, even if you're only prepping someone, you're not going to be on the show. It doesn't work for you to just be on headphones, like your mic, your own mic, because you're not showing them what's different between you and them. So I think that's the thing to also keep in mind. Now, next question.
From Dr. Vienna Tran in Australia, from your experience, how often does audio pathology require replacing equipment versus adjusting the setup that already exists?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, shall we get together with Mickey? It depends. It really depends on what an easy solution is, and if you have the replacement equipment handy and ready to go, and how much time constraint are you faced with? Are you faced with the directors there? We're ready to roll. Wait a minute. Oh, I've got a problem with the sound. How do I deal with it? Is it wait, let me just throw in a different microphone. That's one replacement problem. Or if you think you know what the problem is, you might try and mitigate it if it can be mitigated quickly and easily, like changing those, say if it's an external sound, changing the position of the microphone so that it's not picking up the background sound, or moving the cables if it's picking up buzz, or doing a variety of troubleshooting tasks that you can think of quickly if you know what the problem is and you've experienced it before and you can mitigate it easily. Usually I'll just make adjustments. If I do not have a clue as to what the problem is, then that's when I move to replacing the item.
Good, Mickey.
Yeah, definitely in a production, when you're actually on location, you usually do not have the budget to bring a second full truck, or a second essentially like bring the entire warehouse or the entire cage to the location. So you do bring backups of essentials, and it's a simple, like if a piece of gear fails, yes, I always have a additional wireless on hand. Yes, I always have a backup recorder on hand. But there are some things that um, is not feasible to always bring a backup of. So that's when you start to look at what you have right then and there and start to figure out a solution to get the production up and running despite a piece of equipment failing. But having said that, though, with audio equipment, especially well-maintained audio equipment, I see a lot more failures in cabling as opposed to failures in hardware. I always take a look at cabling, follow the path. And on top of that, of course, any microphone that is worn by talent, because that's almost inexpendable.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I don't know how to follow that. The way I built my room here, my Zoom room, it's not a traveling Zoom room. It's a room right here. It's the same situation. As I tried to pull gear out of my back closet that I've had collecting, like the AKG 414, which I used, which I thought was more than good enough for a Zoom room. And then I decided, because I'm a broadcaster, to put some processing, and I had an AFX channel floating around. I know Mickey doesn't like that, but it does what I needed to do. It makes my voice hearable, understandable, and I didn't have to go out and buy new gear in order to make this work.
Go ahead, Carl.
I'll give you an example. So if you're doing something that's front of house, where you have a front of house mixer, let's say it's a X32, the large one, the big one, and let's say you've got a X32 rack or an X32 producer as your monitor mixer up there on stage for your, they've got in-ears for your talent up on stage, and you've got multiple bands coming through, and you're doing sound check, and some of the bands are saying, oh, there's just a bit of a delay. Get yourself a 24-channel analog mixer. Doesn't matter if it's Mackie, Behringer, doesn't matter what it is, just an analog mixer, and put that in place and have that hooked up, ready to go. So you can flick over from a digital mixer to an analog mixer, which has speed of light delay, and you're just simply pumping that into in-ears. So with certain bands that say, oh, there's a bit of a delay here, can you fix that? You can just switch over to the analog system, which is just pure analog, because you can just do a mic splitter into the analog versus the X32 producer, let's say, using on stage. But some bands may want the X32 producer. They may want the digital because they may want effects on their stuff. So you can actually switch between different bands and just have an analog set up, and all you need is some mic splitters. So you just need maybe 3 U's of mic splitters coming in, and they just split out to one going to the producer, or one going to the stage box coming out to the producer, and one going to like a 24 track, which has usually 8 outs plus the 2 main outs. So technically 10. You can have 10 different levels out of that, so you can do 10 different mix minuses technically. It just works, and it's cheap. Like a 24 channel mixer second hand from Behringer is going to be like $400. Brand new is $800, so it's pretty cheap.
Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer from Viera, Florida. What are the typical means to discover the source of audio hum?
Good, Carl.
So Courtney said a good one. So take a look at power lines, switch off things. So as Courtney said, lights, so HMI lights or anything lights with a ballast. So these can also be fluorescent lights. So start switching off lights, but switch them off one at a time. Don't go switch them off all at once. Switch them off one at a time. We'll check your cables. Make sure your cables are overlaying at 90 degrees if you can, if they have to cross. And it's just a process of elimination to get rid of and find out if it's a 50 or 60 hertz hum. We in After Hours, we did this little experiment where we just put up a free analyzer, and we took a look when we switched certain things on and off, and we just saw this enormous 60 hertz hum. And there was no sound going into it. It was just the thing turned on. No microphone going to it. And so take a look, find out what the frequency it is. If it's a weird frequency that's not 50 or 60 hertz, then you want to take a look at other things that are on, like fans, any other kind of D-class amplifiers that are high switching power, those kind of things as well.
But Mitchell?
You're going to think I'm crazy. I like to use my hands. Sometimes when I touch connectors or cables that are audio connections, I change the characteristics of what the hum is being created. I can actually hear the difference. But then again, I also test 9-volt batteries with my tongue.
That's not a good idea. Good, Courtney.
Another good thing to have in your kit is a dummy load, which is basically a microphone connector that has a resistor across it. So it puts a small load on the equivalent load of that microphone on the audio line. You unplug the microphone and plug the dummy load in, and you keep the levels up at the level you're going to be listening to when the microphone was plugged in. That lets you isolate an acoustical hum, something the microphone is picking up through its element, versus inductive hum, which is coming in through the cables or through your preamp or through your power supply, or a number of other paths that the hum can get into your audio system. So with that little dummy plug on the end, that lets you rule out the microphone picking up, let's say, a filament in a bulb that's humming near the microphone. It's picking that up over the microphone's capsule. So that eliminates that, and then you can work toward eliminating that way. Then if it's an inductive hum, that lets you troubleshoot it with everything turned fully up and out without being distracted by the audio coming in from the microphone.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, there are certain tools you should always have access to try to eliminate issues like that. There's a product, I believe it's called a Hum X Eliminator, which can work pretty well. But generally, like, I always try to start at the source, so I really try to avoid, I will not use anything unbalanced in any kind of professional setting. I do also do rentals a lot, and I a lot of times I have DJs come to me and they've got these, cheap DJ controllers with RCM balance, and I'm like, I got to go 100 feet with this. I'm like, no, you don't. So getting a DI box, getting like a 3 foot, as short as possible RCA, convert immediately to balanced, and that will help a lot.
Go ahead, Courtney.
And ground loops are your enemy. And one way to eliminate them is to get a ground lifter, which is a one of those adapters that you get for plugging a grounded plug into a non-grounded outlet. And go through and eliminate pull your AC connection and put that on there so that it's not connected to ground, and try it that way. Never pull out the ground plug. Some people take a pair of diagonal cutters and snip off the grounding pin. That is against the law and is a bad idea. Just bring one of those adapters, and that way you lift the ground sequentially on different plugs or different AC sources to let you know if you're getting a ground loop somewhere in your system, and that may eliminate it.
Yeah, and to get back to, I fight pretty hard to try to keep unbalanced signals. Usually in presentations, like when you're doing an event, you can hear a buzz. I'll hear a buzz, and I'll immediately just go straight to the person running Presenter Pro. Is usually the problem, and they've got a little headphone jack out to a DI box, and I immediately hand them a USB pre 2 and say, "How about we use this?" And try to get rid of it, and we used to carry 3 or 4 of them just to get those out of the signal, because even 6 inches can be a problem. Next question.
Josh Kaufman from Pittsburgh, PA. Zoom clients baffle me with the level of awful they manage. Zoom has decent noise reduction, and often the same laptop, AirPods, iPad mic don't suffer as much as some participants are able to abuse them. How to mitigate extremes in gain and intelligibility?
Good, Carl.
So if you're trying to help someone remotely over Zoom and you're trying to get them to sound as good as you can for your production or someone else's production, sort out the distance to the mic. If they're using the built-in mic in their iPad, their phone, their computer, it's not a big problem. Then you want to get them in a quiet space. That's the only catch with that one. You need to get them, as Alex said earlier, you need to get them on separate ears. So headphones, AirPods, something like that, just so they can hear the reverse. You can use the microphones in those, but do an A/B test, figure out which one sounds best in their situation, and then go play around with the noise cancellation. Get it off auto, put it on low first. If there's still too much going on, if you can hear the lawnmower 2 houses over, put it on medium. If they're in a cafeteria in a hospital, you may have to put it on high, but it will work. But yeah, so there's a bit of experimentation, but do one thing at a time, and just explain to them explain to them why you're doing this, because you want them to sound as good as possible in this particular presentation or this particular event.
Yeah, one of the things that we do is, number one is getting ahead of it so that we can talk to them ahead of time. Second is a lot of times sending out kits. I have to admit, I work on very few jobs now where we don't send out kits. And if people don't want the kit, a lot of times I'm like, you have the wrong company. This is not, and it's mostly just because I don't want to just have that in the pipeline. There are, one of the things that I'm working on as we play around with Zoom ISO and everything else is the ability to, I haven't done this yet. We've done it informally, but now we're starting, I want to get it to a point where the person checking the folks on the far end can record them and play them back almost immediately. So they can hit using software, we're trying to kind of figure out exactly how we want to do this, but we can record their signal, for 5 minutes or a minute or 10 seconds and then play it back so they understand it. So you can go, listen to me and listen to you. And that's the difference between, sometimes they just remember that people who are joining the event, they never hear themselves. They don't hear themselves. They say, I do this all the time. Once they hear the difference between what they could sound like and what they do, they oftentimes want to change. And if they don't, well, then you just kind of, everybody's useful sometimes just as a warning. Next question.
Robert Shoji from Los Angeles, California. Could someone explain the gain staging differences between the advanced and basic gain modes on the MixPre series?
Good, Mickey.
In the advanced mode, inside each channel's menu, you are able to adjust the input gain for that channel, while the physical fader adjusts how much of the channel is sent to the left and right mix bus. In advanced mode, that amount of send going to the left and right mix bus is always at unity, always at 0, and the physical fader turns into that input gain knob.
Next question.
Next question from Jeff C. Jeff C. Does voiceover in Miami Beach, Florida. Any experience or thoughts on using Crisp.ai for noise and echo cancellation with Zoom, Teams, etc.?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
You have to be careful of any plug-in being used in real time because the latency is going to become an issue. Crisp seems very interesting. I just don't know how to particularly use it. You can't really insert it unless you're using something like Audio Hijack or one of their products to get that to work.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I try as hard as I can because I deliver a lot of voiceover work. I try to send them a absolutely dry VO take. I will often, particularly for clients who are less sophisticated and don't have audio engineering on their side, also run my standard audio compression and limiting suite against that and send them a second voiceover that they can drop into a project and use as is. Most of my clients who are unsophisticated will use the second one. All of my clients who are more sophisticated will start with the first one that has no coloration, because sound is very much like paint. You mix the green and the blue, you get yellow, and there's no way to get the green and the blue back, and sound is the same way. You put processing on sound, you can't get that processing out once you decided you don't really want it.
Yeah, I played with Crisp. I think I have it on one of my things here, but I found that it was, if you have something like noise assist, Crisp isn't as good. So it's better than nothing in some cases. What I found is that occasionally it would sound pixelated, the audio version of pixelated. So you'd hear the quantizing that's going on, that's there. So that's the I stopped using it because just at times it seemed to grab on too tightly to the audio, and it didn't happen very often, but it happened often enough that I was like, well, that's not usable. The problem with any of these tools is if they don't work all the time, they don't work any of the time. The next question.
Josh Kaufman from Pittsburgh, PA. For remote production, the final leg to deliver audio lies in the IT realm. Assuming a hardwired connection, what IT-based measures are necessary to ensure well-captured audio makes it to the destination? Transport and last mile issues?
A lot of the stuff is kind of basic, making sure that everybody's on a wired connection, managing the hops, managing the overall internet. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I'm taking this question from the point of view of a much larger infrastructure. I would typically have a way to monitor from as late in the chain as possible, either at the final embed or right before the transmission, and also monitor at the far end where the receive is. And we've run into instances where the path in between does for some reason give a discrepancy in what's sent and what is delivered. So listening, or at least metering on both ends is quite important.
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, the problem is since we moved to digital recording, it's sometimes difficult to monitor the playback of your digital recording while you're recording it. And things can happen in the digital recording. Alex sent me a file that happened where something happened in the recorder itself that went awry, and everything sounds fine in the headphones. It sounded great at the time, but when you go to play the recording back, it's just full of distortion. And things can happen during the recording, so you need to spot playback your setup every now and then to make sure that something hasn't gone awry in the recorder, like it's, picking up, 8 bits from outside the buffer range of the file transfer, and putting it into the PCM string.
Not that ever happened to us.
Not that would ever happen, but it does.
Yeah.
And so being able to sample and test just to make sure that there's nothing weird about the setup that is causing the recorder to misrecord stuff that's generating noise that you'll never hear because you're monitoring it before that A to D conversion and before it's being written down to your medium.
Yeah, and what gets you in trouble, and this happens in a lot of places, this is what got us in trouble in an event not too long ago, is when a client makes a bunch of new requests and suddenly we have to make adjustments to those requests that weren't anticipated. And so when you have a bunch of things that you were like, oh, okay, well, now we're going to do this. And when you add things into the system that you didn't plan to add into the system at the last minute, you put yourself in a position where, and then you just need to thoroughly test things that are added. And sometimes the problem, gets into like working with clients that sometimes will create a chaotic environment where there's a lot of things changing, coming and going. And it's not just, and this is what you have to be careful of. And sometimes it catches the best of us. So it's hard to say because, oh, well, that's obvious if you're not there. But when you're there, you have a crew that is being stretched way beyond their time. And they're just not able to pay attention to everything, and that's what you have to kind of get careful of. The other thing is that what we try to do is use things often, even if they're for things that don't pay anything, like just exercise the system as often as possible so that you see things and you get used to things and you kind of work through things. And so, like, for instance, one of the things we're doing with the system that we had trouble with in the past is that we're running something weekly through it, so that we can, if we're not doing shows, we're still running a podcast through it where it's exercising the whole system, and we're making sure that all the bits and pieces and all the signal flows are all working, just to make sure that if there's idiosyncrasies, we see them when it doesn't matter, not when it matters. Go ahead, Bill.
I just want to de-idiotify myself. Obviously, as Dennis pointed out, green and blue paint do not make yellow. I don't know where my brain went for a moment. It works much better if you try blue and yellow. So if you're at home and experimenting, you're going to go a long time before you get yellow out of that.
Yeah, there you go. Next question.
Next question is in from Josh Kaufman again in Pittsburgh, PA. What are the telltale signs that a speaker presenter has not been well matched to their audio gear and settings? For example, microphone, EQ, compression. How much is taste versus objective malpractice?
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, so before I even look at any kind of processing or EQ, I always start with my first line of defense, which is the microphone selection. So things that I look for that are fatiguing with spoken word are typically excessive sibilance. So if somebody's voice tends to be a little bit higher pitched or perhaps nasally, choosing certain microphones that have very bright characteristics are not going to be particularly flattering to that person. So I'd always start there. And of course, the other thing too with handheld mics is I also look at technique. So if somebody's got the microphone way down at their belly and it's 3 feet away from them, then that also may not be the right selection of a type of microphone. You may want to go with a headset and get it really close to their mouth. And also compression too. Very, very light compression in any kind of light, in any kind of live sound setup. With music production, pop music and stuff like that, they tend to use a lot of heavy compression. It just doesn't really translate well live.
Good, Carl.
So one thing I see a lot, especially at convention centers, you've got your little lectern, little podiums, and they usually got 2 goosenecks. One of those goosenecks is dynamic, and one is a condenser. So many companies make these. Audio Technica does, Behringer make them. They actually make they always look matched, but one's a dynamic, one's a condenser. And so what they'll do is your A1, if you've got a person who's quite boomy, they'll put them on the dynamic. If you've got someone who's a bit light, a little bit too far away, they'll put them on the condenser. It will pick up more, but it'll pick them up more flat because generally condensers are a more flat response with maybe a peak at the higher end, whereas dynamic mics are like this. They're always like this. No matter which dynamic mic you have, they're slanted, their frequency response. So that's one thing you can do if you're in a live scenario. You can actually have 2 different goosenecks, just running 2 different types of capsules.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I would say like all of this is subjective, but you can use your whatever the goal is as your guidance. At the end of the day, telltale signs that a speaker presenter is not well matched to their gear. If the audience and the client are not happy with your product.
Go ahead, Bill.
And somebody just has to be monitoring, and it has to be somebody who knows what it sounds like. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a presenter on stage, and they don't realize that every time they exhale from their nose, it's hitting the diaphragm on their lavalier and creating a big. And if nobody tells them that, if they don't have a way to monitor their own sound, if they're not in headphones or some sort of IFB, they won't know that. No one can know that. So those kinds of things, you must have a monitoring system that you can hear the sound if you're in a performance, to find those simple things and get rid of it. If I'm all, slobbery, and you can hear that on the microphone, I should be able to hear that too, and swallow and do something to get rid of all that excess noise. So you got to be able to listen.
Next question.
From J.J. McKenna, Santa Venetia, California, and behind the scenes here. Alex, when trying to find a particular room noise that only appears at certain times of day, what should a technician consider?
Everything. Everything. You have to figure it all out. We were talking about this recently. We had an issue where it was only happening when we were trying to record, and every other time it was not happening. And but it sounded like it was in the room. And we looked at everything in the building to figure out what was making that sound. And the problem is we're in an old building that does make a lot of noises. And so it's not like you can just say, well, it's just something, something new is possible all the time in the building that we're in. So we were trying to figure that out. It turned out that it was if you take a pair of hearing aids and you set them on the table near each other, they will make a sound that is not very loud, but will sound a lot like a loose belt, which is because we have so much air conditioning around, what it sounded like is an air conditioner with just a slightly loose belt, where you have this, and that is, it sounds just like a loose belt if you've ever had one on your, and it's anyway, and so we spent a lot of time trying to find a loose belt. It turned out to be two hearing aids sitting on a table next to the person. Anyway, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, well, one tool that I found useful, I had a sound in a room and I wasn't sure. I knew it was coming on intermittently, but I couldn't figure out from what. So I have a little Zoom H6, and I found that if you put a really big card in it and plug it into shore power, you can leave it on in a room for like 24 hours. And so I did that, and I came back and I zoomed through that, and I found it was coming on at certain times. And I realized that was a timer out in the backyard that was doing something, kicking on backyard lights, and they were infecting the power. And so having that 24-hour listen automatically really helped me find the problem.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, try and test your equipment at the same time of day as it will be used. And when you're scouting locations, scout them at the same time of day that you're going to be shooting them. Because, if you're near an airport, when you scouted it, maybe they shut down that airport at 9 o'clock at night, like the Burbank airport, and you scouted it at 10:30. Hey, it sounded great. And then you're going to shoot at 12:30 or 8 a.m. in the morning, where it's a plane taking off every 10 minutes or 5 minutes. So make sure you scout your location at the same time you're going to shoot it, and listen for things. And there are unheard things that can interfere with your audio. I had a situation at a SMPTE show in New York where we were in the basement of a building and setting up a booth, and we kept getting the video on the monitors kept changing color every now and then. We couldn't figure out why, and we checked all of our equipment, what's going wrong. Turns out every time the subway would go underneath, the electric motors from the subway would generate a huge EMI field, which would distort the color in all the monitors every time a subway train went through. And it took us about a day and a half to realize that. So you got to troubleshoot over the period of time at which you'll be working.
I'm sure that wouldn't affect the people at all that work there. Mitchell.
Air blowers and weed whackers, scourge of the planet.
Yeah, and you'd be surprised at how many times cleaning crews do have behaviors that don't appear to them as a problem that ends up being a problem. that they just plug things into wherever they need to plug them into, and it affects things. But the big thing that is to observe that room. I think in the case that I think JJ is referring to is people worked in that room all week, and so it basically by the third time it happened, we knew that it was not happening it's only happening when the person's there, and that allowed us to kind of zero in on the problem. Go ahead, Mickey.
And yeah, if you notice a loud fan whenever you're shooting, check if you're shooting on the red.
Yeah, exactly. Courtney.
And the other example, perfect example, is during one of Steve Jobs' keynotes, is make sure you test everything beforehand. It works fine, but then when you put 500 people in the room, all with cell phones turned on Wi-Fi, things can go very awry if you're using any kind of wireless information. So make sure you test it in the situation with all the little mobile devices that are going to be there when you use it.
And it comes down to using it often too. Like one of the things that we learned early on doing a lot of White House events was that, when Secret Service comes in, suddenly all the wireless stops working. And, only when, but not when Secret Service is there, but only when POTUS or FLOTUS is in the room, suddenly a lot of your wireless stops working. We did find that Axience, it's one of the reasons I hang on to Axience so much, is the Axience were able to usually manage that effectively. We were in South Africa with FLOTUS, and we immediately told the crew there that that wireless was not going to work. Like it was a Sennheiser or something or other, but we just knew that's one of the ones that won't work when FLOTUS is in the room. And so we backed it up with a SM58 with a wired cable underneath the chair, and that's what she used. After a 15-minute delay of them trying to figure out why the wireless wasn't working, even though we told them it wouldn't work. Not that we're bitter. Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer from Vieira, Florida. How do you deal with audio phase issues?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
If it's in post, make sure you're not listening to stereo. Go to one of the channels and use that. If it's on both channels and you only have a mono and you hear phase, you're in trouble.
Go ahead, Mickey.
In a live situation, if the phasing is due to position of microphones, like say if you're miking up a drum kit or multiple mics on a guitar cabinet, then I would go ahead and actually move the mics, solve it at the source. If it's not due to that, I would go down the line and make sure that the audio paths are identical. There's not one that's going through some sort of weird AD or DA conversion that may induce a delay. And if all else fails, you can adjust the input delay on each channel. Though, if it's a situation where that Bill mentioned earlier, where it's two lavs on actors that are coming close to each other, that is when since you don't have control of the exact placement, that's when you use your faders.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, it helps to train your ears to know what to actually look for and to actually identify what a phase problem sounds like. I mean, typically it sounds like a hollow sort of sound. So, for example, in a scenario where you're miking up a snare drum, typical technique is to have a mic at the top and then a mic at the bottom pointing at each other. And generally, you want to have one of those mics have the phase flipped. If it's in post, I mean, I really like the Waves In Phase plugin, which is very comprehensive for dealing with aligning things properly. Of course, if it's just an issue where you have an asymmetric waveform and you want to optimize the headroom on that, you can use the phase rotator module inside of RX, which will help correct that as well.
Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, so as was said, the thing, I think a drum kit's a good way to example to do this. So if you do go to the board and you actually flip, let's say, one of the microphones on the snare at 180 and it's still out of phase, then it's physically moving, as Mickey said. You want to physically move that microphone. You may not have to move it very far, like maybe 2 inches, 3 inches. That's if you're in a live scenario with multiple microphones. Maybe phase is something you do want a guitar cabinet, so be careful of that. Don't go getting rid of phase if the guitarist actually intended to do that themselves. So be careful of that one. The other thing is if it's in post and it's monophase, RX is pretty good at actually analyzing monophase and then applying essentially an anti signal on top of that'll actually cancel out part of the phase. So RX is pretty complicated as far as that. It does like micro adjustments and that kind of things that Mickey was talking about. So in post, you can do quite a lot with RX, even with a monophase issue.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and if you have a board that has a phase reverse button, which makes it very easily done, is test it. Create a sound that's coming in both microphones, bring both microphones up to equal level, and then pop that phase button back and forth. If the level increases when it's inverted, then you've got a phase reversal problem. And if it lowers, phase will lower if it's canceling out. Even if you don't hear the difference, you can see the difference on a meter a lot of times.
Yeah, go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I just want to touch on the difference there is a difference between phase and polarity, and I won't dive into that now, but I do want to say in post-production, auto-aligned post from a company called Sound Radix is a massive, massive time saver. People might say it's expensive at $400 US, but that $400 US is made up in half a day of using it.
What's it called again?
Auto-align post.
Auto-align post.
You give it a reference. Say, if you want to line up, if you have, 2 booms and then maybe 6 lavaliers, you pick one to be your reference, and it phase aligns all the other microphones.
That's great. Fantastic. Yeah, and I will touch on polarity just for a second, because sometimes people interchange those. Polarity, of course, is voltage, and sound is pressure. Phase is pressure, air pressure. The one thing that is very important in a live event is to have meters, and one meter that you want is the Ligizu meter. And what it'll do is it'll be a cross like this, and if it's in mono, you'll see something going up and down, just straight up and down like this. If it's stereo, you'll see it kind of like a little flower going out like this. If it turns 90 degrees, you have a signal that is got a polarity issue, and that is a super important thing to be able to visually see in there, because what happens is that we had a pretty large event where the one of the channels, so left and right, one of the channels had a polarity problem. So when someone built the convenience board, probably some intern, they just got the wires mixed, And so, and what happens is that this gets back, we were talking about the volume. The volume on the right channel wasn't as light so everything was a little low, but we didn't know, but the volume, and we kept on asking him to fix it. And then when they finally fixed it, suddenly it just canceled out. And it's like a perfect cancel. All you could hear. And what's interesting is if you listen to it in headphones, you can still hear it. So it's only when it got summed to mono is when it would cancel. So it means that every phone at the time would cancel out, but anybody listening to the stream would hear it just fine. And it's because we didn't have a Ligizu meter to see that, because we were of course had cans on, and we were sitting there and everything sounded fine to us, and everyone kept on saying, well, no one can hear it on the phone, and so that is another thing that you have to think about. Now, what we did to fix that was we remapped the left channel to the right channel. Like we just said, I don't have, I'm in a show, I don't have time to fix this. And we just flipped it over, copied it, and it sounded fine. You just didn't have stereo anymore. Go ahead, Mickey.
And yeah, somewhat related to that, specific to mixing and surround, this issue has kind of been solved if you're rendering to Atmos or delivering in Atmos. But most of the time in typical channel-based surround mixing, you would like to avoid leaving an element panned in between speakers. So if you're doing a 7-1 mix, do not leave an element panned right in the middle of your right channel and your left side surround and your right side surround channel, because not every seat in a cinema is at a good spot, and not every speaker system is placed perfectly. Right.
So you can get into things where it's out of phase for some people and not others.
Yeah. Yeah, they arrive at a person's ear out of phase with each other just because of timing issues in the physical world.
Absolutely. Next question.
And it's from Josh Kaufman. It's our last question. He's from Pittsburgh, PA. What solutions, software kits, etc., can be used to dial in a remote participant's audio and eliminate issues? 2 classes of interest. A, complete control. Participant opens the box and plugs it in. B, some participant cooperation is needed.
Go ahead, Harshid.
So I'm taking this from my own perspective of just audio in general. If you're working with a talent or anybody, let's say if it's Windows, Quick Assist on Windows itself, you will have full access to their computer. So if you do need to go in and mess with any kind of settings that way, the other part is Zoom itself gives you mouse control. So if you do need something to control the participant or whoever you're trying to work with audio, you do have a little bit more control, and we've actually identified that in After Hours. So those are just a couple of thoughts there.
Yeah, screen control on Zoom is probably, as Harshid said, is probably the first thing, and then after that, it's for us, it's usually sending the computer out. so sending for us typically a Mac Mini out with it, because the Mac Mini is capable. The M1 Mac Minis will show up as 1080p sources, as opposed to a lot of the smaller PCs. Hopefully in the future this will get fixed, but right now I still get limited to 720, so that becomes more problematic. But we then we take over the screen, and then we have control. And for us, we control a lot of things that way. We control oftentimes via Bluetooth, and via the connections we'll control an ATEM switcher, and in return we'll also control all the settings with Bluetooth to the camera, to the 6K camera. And we'll also have Wingman open for our MixPre so that we can see what's going on there and able to start and stop record. So those are a couple of different things that we're doing. And we may start standardizing on those. I have to admit, with the stuff that we've been doing recently, we were just sending out the mics, and I'm not used to that anymore. And it's painful not to be able to log in. We do set those up with VPN. So we only have to do screen capture, in that way just for a little bit so that we can get full control over it. All right, Guy, go ahead.
Yeah, the new Rodecaster Pro is pretty exciting, where right now in this current firmware, they do not have this remote control ability, but there is an Ethernet port on the back, and surprise, surprise, you'll be able to pretty soon save your show, recall the show, and so it basically makes it so they cannot mess up. Like you could lock it down, and then if you have to go in, you can tweak it from afar.
That's great. Really cool. All right. That's good. That's a good show. That was fun. That was I want to thank Josh Kaufman. Josh manages the second hours, and I didn't have to work on this. There was a cancellation. He already had a solution that was at least as good, and produced a great conversation. So great job, Josh, on making that pivot for us this morning, sending me out the description. Like, we don't have this ready to go. We have this ready to go. Pick the description and just post it into the thing. So it was just really well done. And thanks to, of course, our producers asking all the great questions. Thanks to the incredible production team putting this together every single day. It keeps on looking better and running smoother every single day. Well, most days. Every single week it gets better. Most days it gets better. Today was a particularly good day. So it's really well done. And thanks to the panelists. We can't do this without you. Really, really good conversation. I love our audio days. We really dig deep into this process. So stay tuned. David Paskin, right after this, as we get out of this, we'll be talking about eCam Live in After Hours. So come join us there. And a reminder that we have opened ISO. I think we should call it Open ISO, but Zoom ISO testing from 1 to 3 every day now, so that people can keep on testing their Zoom ISO setups. All right, here we go. Off to After Hours. Someday Mitch will learn how to whisper. Oh, there he goes. It's called
Great show, guys. Great show.
Yeah, that was
Whispering is video now.
There was lots of, he can whisper video. He's whispering video. I see how it is. Yeah, but it's a good show. Audio days are good. Not always good, but mostly good. Yeah. You do that every day. Not audio. Shows.
Just get deep.
Philosophy. Philosophy. That's Sunday. Sunday is philosophy.